Societal and political trends are rapidly breaking down the family that once was the cornerstone of our great American culture. At FIT, we know you cannot get this information on your own, so we'll bring it to your TV every single week. And we always invite all opposing views. World War I and World War II veterans were treated as heroes. Since the 1950s, the American psyche about war has changed. There exists a disconnect between those veterans in Korean War and the Vietnam War veteran. Called police actions by politicians back then, Americans were left to define their own perceptions of peace without war. The current administration is doing the same thing, more or less, now regarding our current World War III against terrorism. Americans did not want to fight the war in Vietnam, and the narrative about war in general was, we don't want war. We invite you to communicate with Vietnam veterans to find out for yourself. You should. As a veteran returning from overseas, I remember the lack of respect and admiration World War I and II vets had. Saw them watching the old newsreels. We should not let that happen to any returning war veteran from hence. My guest today is Vietnam veteran and author of a book, Losing the War in Vietnam, is Frank DiScala. Welcome, Frank.
Thank you.
What you should do, Frank, is tell us a little bit about the story of your, if you can do it in about 2 minutes.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, just to recreate the times at when Vietnam was going hot and heavy in the 60s and the early 70s, there was a lot of social unrest. There were a lot of anti-war folks out in the streets, and I remember when I graduated in '67, before I went on active duty, this created a lot of turmoil for a lot of the ROTC folks like me and the people that were drafted. The country didn't seem to be supporting us. This was really, you know, it created a conundrum, and you didn't know if it was a just cause or not.
Yeah.
And it only got worse as time went on. And I remember when I got to Vietnam, it was just an insane situation, because you had the military brass telling you one thing about what the objective was. You would go out and kill as many folks as you could, and they would just seem to come back and multiply in greater numbers. We didn't seem to be making any progress. It didn't make any sense. And then when I got home, I was mentally and physically exhausted to go and to hear people say the things that they said about us. I outlined some of them. They called us murderers and baby killers. It created such havoc and mental distress for all the folks that came back. And we're reaping the benefits of now with so many Vietnam vets not being able to fit in, not being able to find work. The suicide rates are horrible, the unemployment and the homelessness. So this is all the byproduct of the unrest of that time.
Right.
And so hopefully we've learned a lesson, and we'll treat our returning warriors with much more respect and admiration.
As a veteran coming back from that same time frame when I came back from overseas, I also experienced that tremendous gap of information that was going on with the populace. I remember the division of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and that's all what it was about in that mid-'60s range, and hardly anybody really cared about the war in Vietnam or really understood it. All they wanted to do was protest against it. Right. So coming back was a very difficult situation for a lot of us. The greatest generation is the World War I and World War II especially now. There's hardly anybody, I don't think there is anybody left from World War I, but hardly anybody left from World War II. And they wanted to fight. They were lined up. I don't believe, was it drafting at that time? I don't recall.
I believe that when the war started, they needed to fill the ranks, so they did.
But people were lined up to go. And
they volunteered more than they were drafted.
The spirit of that American individual seems to have been lost in the Korean and Vietnam Wars, as I was trying to say in my opening. What do you think the difference was?
The difference was, there were two things. And FDR was a great wartime president. And so you had strong leadership, and you had a just cause. We were just attacked in Pearl Harbor, and we lost so many of our men in such a dastardly and unprovoked attack. And that just sort of spurred on the American sentiment that this was a just cause, and everybody got behind the government. Right. And they went all out. They were all hands on deck. So it started with leadership, it started with a just cause, and everybody got behind it. We are lacking those two things.
Yeah,
in
it
the
upsets me
policing.
when people look back at us, and people at our age who were drafted, as I was drafted, and they look at us and say, you know, you're different. Some of you guys went to Canada. Some of you guys avoided the draft in any which way that they could, and some of that was true. I don't know if that happened in World War II, but the fact that it did happen made it even more difficult for us at that time.
It did, because you knew going into it that you weren't sure about the objective and what you were hearing on the political side of it. You were getting all this negative feedback from the folks back at home, and then you had the specter of people running away, like you said, going up to Canada and not fulfilling their obligation. You had people in public burning their draft cards.
Yeah.
It was really almost an impossible time for a young guy to process all this. And on top of that, you knew in a few short weeks you'd be on a plane, and who knows if you would ever see the light of day again, see your family.
Yeah, it was a scary time for a lot of the draftees, that's for sure. The picture of what went on back then is going to be incomplete until you tell us a little bit more about what you need to tell us about a Vietnam returning vet. There were so many different consequences that they had to deal with.
Any folks have to understand, like, when you're in a war, no matter what kind of an individual you are, if you come from a strong family, not so strong family, there is trauma involved in it, because killing people is a very unnatural thing.
Right.
And so you have to try and reconcile what you did, and then come home to an angry public and heaping more scorn on
double
it.
whammy.
So you're in a state of trauma, and you don't, in those days, having something in your head that wasn't right, having a mental disorder, there was a lot of stigma and shame attached to it. And as a result, no one knew where to go to get help. No one knew that what they were feeling was a natural byproduct of going through hell. And so you really had no place to go to get any counsel, any help, any healing.
Do you know if that happened to
problem.
the world? Do you know if it happened in the wars that were prior?
Go ahead. World War II, I remember reading a piece that President Eisenhower wrote. He said that was one of the things they did an absolutely miserable job on. There were a lot of people that came back from World War II that had PTSD. And they just didn't, you know, the war was over, everybody was happy, and so they sort of forgot about how do we help them heal.
And some things you can't forget about.
But it was a little easier for transition, because these people were welcome home as heroes, and the public mindset was more supportive.
And what a terrific difference that could have made.
It could have made a big difference in in my life, because I didn't want to I was ashamed of the whole deal. I didn't know why I was feeling the way I did, but you know, it took me 30 years to figure it out, and it almost destroyed me, so I'm happy to be here.
In your book, there's a part about the number of people serving in America. The 1% served, and 7% of the American citizens are veterans. That's a pretty high number now?
It is.
It's a number to deal with in terms of what percentage of those people are still needing help.
Quite a few, and unfortunately, if you do a little research on this, other cultures treat their warrior class, their military folks, with much more honor, respect, and they're in a much higher place in society. We here, and especially the Vietnam folks,
you had that special program in Vietnam you were telling me about. Oh, I'm sorry, you were telling me about. You said in your book that I read about. They have a different way of handling things.
The Vietnamese, the warrior class is a very high class in society, and these are the folks that have all the wisdom and knowledge. So when they come back and they're hurting, if they need a house, they get a house. If they need to see a doctor, they see a doctor. There's no waiting lines. They get what they need, and they feel the love and support from the community, and the community brings them up. We don't have that. We have people who are fighting for us, but unfortunately, a lot of it doesn't get done because of all the bureaucracy and the incompetence of bureaucracy.
Is there, let's talk about PTSD for a minute, post-traumatic stress disorder. For those that experience that, and there's plenty of people who are experiencing that now coming out of the
there's lots of it now.
The Afghan and Iraqi conflict. I would imagine there must have been plenty of that during World War II as well. So what can we do, or what has been done so far? Is there something we can do to help them out further?
Well, there are a lot of people that are trying to get things done. I think the missing piece in this puzzle is the government inefficiency and the bureaucracy of the VA, which is basically there to help us. It's an old model based on World War II demographics. It doesn't support the current population of veterans. We were talking off the cuff. It would be better for the VA to disappear altogether and the Department of Defense to deal with our returning veterans, because the suicide rate is just horrible. 22 a day commit suicide. So we have to do something about it, and what's happening now at the VA isn't getting it done.
So the VA is a separate entity right now taking care of
Run
veterans?
by civilian bureaucrats who have no idea what it's like to be in a war zone, what you feel like
So
when
what
you
you're
come
saying
back.
makes a lot of sense to turn it back to
Let the military,
people who have an idea.
Right, because the military, there's a chain of command, there's responsibility. People who have to get things done. And if you don't get things done, they just remove you and put somebody else in who can do the job. Unfortunately, with the bureaucracy...
And in combat, if you're not getting something done, you're sacrificing everyone in your
and
platoon.
you're not going to come back.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that there has to be more accountability. They can't fire people. It's just terrible the way it is right now.
There is also, you talk about in your book about the spiritual component, and that returning to civilian life, there can be an adjustment for, say, education and things that are not employed now. We don't have a great employment or education component in the Veterans Administration now.
That's correct.
So if we had the spiritual component with education and employment,
Well, I think they could do that relatively easily, and it wouldn't cost a lot of money to do it. And what I would suggest they do is when these people come back from a combat tour, and keep in mind these folks have been out there 2 or 3 times in very intense combat situations. They have to keep them together in a group, let them decompress, give them some chaplain services where they could get some spiritual healing, let them get psychological counseling so they can tell people how they feel, let them unwind. It's kind of like a deep sea diver. If you let them go back into civilian life too quickly, or if you bring the diver up too quickly, he'll die from having stuff in the system that he can't get out.
Sure.
It's the same thing with a soldier. He's got stuff in his mind. It's like a bad cloud that follows you. If you don't give a chance for it to dissipate, you're going to have it for the rest of your life.
if the world could just look at the possibility of them suffering, say, a family member dying, for instance, or a close family member dying, then you might relate to the grief that somebody can feel when a member of your own platoon possibly is
right. Churches have ministries just for that, to console people in times of loss. They send people to the house. I know that when my mother-in-law passed away, they sent someone over to see how we were doing, to ask us questions, to talk, and let us express our grief at the loss of a family member. And I think consolation and reconciliation and healing are all part of the process of getting better.
Now, is there an attachment now that the Veterans Administration, the VA hospitals have now in any way that you would say, in a reporting sense, is working? You know, do you think that the whole thing needs to be changed? You said before that the whole thing...
Well, where the heavy population centers are, like in Phoenix, we have a lot of problems with the VA there, and in Texas, there's a heavy population of veterans. Long Island, we're not as dense. We have a big population. But what we've done here very successfully is we've taken the backlog and we funneled a lot of that backlog off to clinics, like you have one at Patchogue, Riverhead, Valley Stream. So that offloads from the main hospital.
What's that?
They have clinics, VA clinics.
Oh.
So, for example, I used to go...
in other words... Population areas, you mean? They have separate...
Right. So, in other words, a guy who's living out in Riverhead wouldn't have to travel all the way in to the Northport facility. But the other thing about where we are, we have excellent service because this VA hospital is well managed, and they have... it's a teaching hospital for Stony Brook. So they have interns working there. So it's very closely watched by the state. And
I go there now and then. I remember seeing the Stony Brook.
So it's a very well-run facility. I've never had a problem there. I get glasses there. I go for physical checkups.
Yeah.
You know, so to me, this is well-run, and perhaps the other facilities were having the big backlog problems and people aren't getting seen by the doctors. They should take a look at what we're doing here with the clinics and so on and so forth. So there is hope that they could do it better.
You talk also in your book about the possibility of tying in retirement programs, which to the federal workers program.
To me, it doesn't make sense. You have a young 20-year-old going over into the most intense combat situation, comes back, has all these problems to deal with, gets himself back together, they send them back over again. Some of them do as much as 4 or 5 tours in combat. They have to put 20 years in under these intense conditions to qualify for a retirement. You take a federal worker who's sitting in an air-conditioned building with a nice desk, perks and benefits, and the Lord knows what he's doing on his PC. A lot of times they're not doing the right thing. There's so much waste, fraud, and abuse in government bureaucracy. These people are vested after 10 years. Doesn't make sense to me that our frontline warriors who are protecting these folks back in Washington shouldn't get the same benefits package that these people have.
I'm glad you put it the way you put it, because it's a remarkable situation. Because
it is. It's just
like you say, they're sitting around relaxing and they're getting these nice benefits.
Who knows what they're doing?
Meanwhile, somebody's endangering their lives and they can't get this.
It makes absolutely no sense. And the other thing to try to rectify that is to get more legislative people who are in the military into Congress.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. That's I interviewed Lee Zeldin, and
he's fantastic.
I mentioned that on the program, as a matter of fact. I mentioned to him there should be more people.
He's a great young guy. I worked for him on his campaign. I have a lot of respect for him. He has a wonderful family. He's a Long Island guy, and he knows what it's like to be away from home and to be in danger constantly. So he's working real hard to try and get things done.
Yeah, I'm glad he's around. He's doing a great job so far too, and he's apparently well liked, and that's another major.
He's a very talented guy. He has a lot to offer.
Let's talk a little bit about you call it restarting the draft. I used to call it, because I called for this a long time ago, even when I came out of the service, that maybe there should be some kind of civil service call for everyone, that everyone could spend, male and female, spend a year in civil service. It could be military, it could be health-related, nursing-related, anything that devotes its time to the
civil service.
To civil service.
I couldn't agree with you more. If we look at the unemployment rate with the millennials, the 18 to 24 age bracket, it's very high. And with the minorities, the blacks and the Latinos, extremely high. I know that one of those groups is up around 41% based on the research I did for my book in 2013. And so if we had a draft or patriotic service or something that didn't have the word draft in it, we could attract young people. It would all be, it would start at the top with the government leadership. We're looking at the situation.
You just take out the word and somehow it makes a difference, right?
Yeah, you have to sell it to the people that this is something that's worthwhile. You have 3 components in it: duty, honor, and country. We don't get that with our young kids. Our young kids are more interested in the next Xbox game or what kind of iPhone apps they can buy. It seems like doing something for your country is not on their radar screen.
And I think that would change a lot of things.
It would make things a whole lot better. You would be less busier with reconciling.
Attempting to reconcile divorcing couples, yes.
Exactly.
You know, it makes a big difference, I think, when you put something out towards your country and you become more a part of it. And you're right.
And if they compensated them properly, too. I mean, if they gave them a career path where they could get something out of it, similar to what teachers only have to put in 5 years to get vested in a pension.
I thought it was 10, right?
I just retired as a civil servant as a bus driver. I only had to put 5 years in and I was vested.
Yeah.
So it depends on what time you get in or what tier you get in on the retirement system. But it probably is 10 years now, so I wouldn't doubt that.
The other interesting part about your book, when you mentioned something about the chaplain's spiritual healing without the fear of being brought up on charges by the PC police.
Well, I'll give you the case. Chaplain Mater, he was a 19-year Navy chaplain. He was reading scriptures to a group of Navy SEALs, and it was on a topic that was apparently very sensitive to some of these folks, and they didn't like it, so they went to the commanding officer and complained to him about it.
Oh, God.
That were demeaning their sexual tendencies or something like that. So what happened? They put this guy up on charges right after he got an excellent evaluation at the end of his 19th year. So here he is getting near the end of to the finish line in his career, and this happens to him.
Yeah.
So he had to go to the Liberty Institute. He was represented by them. He just won the case. He was on Fox News, and he, you know, he's like, he's probably scratching his head like, I was just trying to help these guys heal from their service, and here I am up on charges. And it seems to be the pattern with the progressive liberals are trying to vacuum faith and God out of every nook and cranny of the healing process.
I talked to a few liberal friends of mine and talked to them about the war against Christmas, and they said, what war? There's no war against Christmas. Take a look. They're not looking at the right programming. If you're looking at MSNBC, you'll never see anything about it. But if you do look at Fox, you do see the stories, the names of the principals, the names of the schools. It's all right there, taking away the rights of Christians.
And the sad thing about this,
and they don't believe it's happening.
If you talk to the people that are involved at the Liberty Institute, they'll tell you for every individual that has the spine and the gumption to fight it, there are at least 10 other cases where they don't do anything and they cave.
Right.
They give up the menorah. They don't put out the nativity scene.
It usually costs something to get that far sometimes, too, which is
there was one that right here at home, which I think you probably really appreciate. There was a young 16-year-old kid that wanted to start an after-school religious group, and he was told he couldn't do it. He went to the Liberty Institute, fought his way. It took him 2 years to do it, but he finally was able to get it on the First Amendment freedom of religion. They are allowed to form a religious group after school hours, and so he finally got it done. But you know, that's what's happening out there. There's a lot of pushback as far as traditional values.
Crazy it is. What would you say to those veterans right now who have not yet taken up the cause to hear, to read what's in your book, or to know what possibilities there are?
I was with a lady, a very nice lady. She has 2 brothers, Vietnam vets. One has been in a nursing home for the last 12 or 13 years at age 57. He just couldn't get himself back into the swing of society. I would say that no matter how bad you feel or how down in the dumps you are, that you can get better, and there are places to go and people to talk to. I'll just mention 2 of them very quickly. Soldiers Project, which is now being sponsored by Tom Croce. If you go on soldiersproject.net, you can get counseling service if you're waiting for the VA to make a judgment whether you can see a psychiatrist or not. They will take care of you. They will take care of your family, and it's done, no questions asked. You just have to be a veteran. Okay. And then the other one is Dr. Tick's beautiful website called Soldier's Heart. And there are a lot of different things for Vietnam vets. They have reconciliation trips back to Vietnam. They have a program for women. We have a lot of women coming back traumatized. And it's called Athena's Project, where they sit down and have healing seminars and talk to them. And it's up in the Albany area where he does a lot of this stuff.
Speaking of which, of the women in combat, I know I think I mentioned this in my note to you ahead of time. Personally, I have a problem with women in combat. I don't know how you feel about that, but I'd like to hear.
I agree with you 100%. There are 2 problems with it. When in our culture, a woman is to be treated protected. So if you're in a combat situation and they get shot, you want to run to them and help them. But that could be the worst thing that could ever happen.
Thank you. I've been saying that for a long time. It's not a healthy position.
As I'm not, the ones, the special operators are saying they're not happy with having a ranger lady next to them.
But they're being the politically correct police of forcing women
it down
into
their
that
throats.
situation. What's your other position on it?
The other position is a man has certain hormones and a woman has certain hormones.
You're making my case again.
The 2 of them don't mix. And look what's going on now. Even in the stateside duty, they're forcing the women into a lot of these units that really they weren't in before.
And in case you missed the news, a submarine just came back, and some man was taking pictures of the women in the showers. There was a trip that a Navy vessel made, spent 6 months or something, and 19 of the 38 women came back pregnant. They have to
It's not-
provide
it
special
doesn't-
quarters
it
for
doesn't
them.
work.
And you put a 19-year-old man or 20-year-old man who's possibly in the service there to defend his country in his sexual prime and have a woman in combat with him or any length of time, and that's going to change too. And it's a waste of time and a waste of money.
Right.
I've been saying that for a long time.
It's social engineering in the
Social
military
engineering,
is the
exactly.
last place you want to have it.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
But politically correct is, look how powerful it is and what a waste it is, right?
I know.
Okay, what you also mentioned in the book, we have just a couple of minutes left, giving generous benefits such as college tuition assistance and keeping soldiers on post for longer time in the, I guess you were talking about in the recovery period when they came back out.
Right.
So in other words, not to come,
Not to let them go.
that's a hard, well, I wanted to come back right away. I was
Well,
not.
that's the point. But
Yeah.
if you've got the uniform on and you have a sergeant who probably has a deep voice and a nasty disposition, if you don't listen to him, he's going to tell you have to stay here. Now, if your buddies are there, it's okay because you're with your fellow warriors. You're not
Right.
going to. So, put them on light duty. Make them go to meetings. Find out what trauma is. Find out what you need to do to make yourself feel better. What if the kid's coming back, he's got nightmares? You're not going to let him go home.
Right.
Let him talk to a psychiatrist and let him talk to the chaplain. We need more chaplains. And I want to just tell you one thing. There was a chaplain, and he wrote he's a fellow author with my publisher, Dave. His name escapes me now. David Peters. He wrote a book called Death Letters, and what he did when he came back, he had such a rough time. His wife divorced him. He went through a messy divorce. He lost his faith for a while, but he is now an Episcopal minister down in Texas, and he has the Episcopal Veterans Fellowship where they get together every 2 weeks. What do? They have barbecues. They drink beer. They talk about faith. They talk about where to go to talk to people to get help.
Are they happy with it?
Yeah, they love it. Took off so well in his parish. 4 other parishes have it, and this kid did the homily at Ground Zero at one of the churches. So here's a perfect example of a guy who went through hell, who saw the benefits of faith healing, and he was trying to bring it to the guys in his community, in his church.
Okay, last question and last little barrage here before our program is over, and that is the possible enjoining of military forces with civilian forces.
I've given that a lot of thought, and I
Okay.
think it's a feasible idea, but in this climate with police worried about doing their jobs, and that comes from the top. So what we need is a new head at the top, someone who respects people who wear the uniform and put themselves in danger in the civil society and the military. Now, once we get that guy in there, we can sit down and have the intelligence folks in the military talk to the intelligence people in the police departments and work together. What is it? Equipment? We know something that's going on. We'll share information with you. We could have people coordinate, but it all starts with the guy at the top. If the guy at the top's not willing to identify who the enemy is, how are we going to try and fight it on the local level?
Right.
What you're talking about is a good idea, but it's going to take leadership, and it's going to take a lot of coordination and sharing.
And that might be too expensive. I understand it might be bigger than we can imagine, but I just thought about the possibility of
I think it's a good
veterans.
idea. I really do. Look what happened with the scare out in L.A. I mean,
Right.
there was a lot of information being
You send a
passed by-
bunch of people in there to take a look.
Yeah, I mean, if there was a little closer coordination, maybe they could have avoided this whole thing.
Frank DiScala, thank you very much. And your book, Losing the War in Vietnam, is an excellent book for those who haven't had a chance to study or look at anything about members of the Vietnam War. It's a great example.
Oh, thank you very much,
Frank.
Chris, for having me on your show.
You've been watching FIT TV, the program that brings you behind the scenes of our divorce culture. At FIT, we know you cannot get this information on your own, so we'll bring it to your TV every single week. We always accept all opposing views. My name is Chris DiMaggio, and thank you very much for watching FIT TV, and we'll see you again next week.